What is up, guys? How's it going? Today we have another video brought to you by HeroesHearth. HeroesHearth, thanks so much for sponsoring this video. If you don't know what HeroesHearth is, it's the very biggest league in Heroes of the Storm right now. It's awesome stuff, competitive play. All the ex-pro players have come back. It's really exciting. You should definitely check it out. Twitch.tv/HeroesHearth if you haven't. Besides that, today we're talking about Cattlepillar's top 5 tips for tanking. Cattlepillar is one of the very best tanks who's ever played Heroes of the Storm. He's international tournaments, North America, Europe. Very awesome player, so we're really excited to have him today. And yeah, you can check him out. He's playing at HeroesHearth as well. All right, so tip number 1, it's track cooldowns. So Cattle, for most tank players, what should they keep in mind for tracking cooldowns, you think?
So as a tank, you yourself don't really do that much. Like you don't have the kill threat to really finish off any hero on your own. So it's really important for you to track all of your allies' cooldowns. Say you're playing a Stitches and you use your hook. If there's no follow-up CC, the target just kind of walks away. So you have to make sure that your Malfurion has his Rudolph cooldown so that he can actually follow up. Basically, as a tank, you're just kind of an enabler, and your team is who actually ends up doing the hard work and finishing the job. And at the same time, as a tank, you want to be aware of what defensive cooldowns your opponents have up, because again, if you're using your spells when they can just vault away and run out of it, then you're just being very ineffective. So it's just really important to be aware of what your team is able to do and what the enemy team is able to do so that your engage is effective.
Okay, that's awesome. That's definitely not what I see in my Storm League games, so these are good tips.
Yeah.
Tip number 2 is kind of a more complicated one. It's to keep vision and then also keep out of vision. Could you give us a breakdown of that one?
Yeah, so that's a big job for tanks, just because your kit usually doesn't have that much power in itself. It ends up being your role to really keep track of where the enemies are. So a lot of times I'll find myself just sitting in a bush, and what you want to do as a tank is you want to figure out what the enemy is doing so that your team can respond and catch them off guard. So I'll be anchored in a bush and you see the enemy tank rotate past, and now you know, okay, the opponent's trying to do something top lane, but we know in advance so we can set it up, set a trap. And that's just where keeping track is really good. And sometimes it's going to be better to just let someone walk by. That's where you're keeping vision, but you want to stay out of vision so that they don't know where you are. And it just comes down to having more information than your opponent, because that's how you win in the end. Whoever's plan fails because the other team just counters it properly.
Okay, so you're in vision when you're keeping vision for your team when you need to be, and you're keeping out of vision for your team. This is a tricky one for a lot of people, especially me. When should you be willing to die as a tank?
Yeah, so that's a big one. I hear people say like, oh, as a tank you should always be willing to die, and I kind of disagree with that, because it's really never good to die, because as a tank you're really the front line. So if I die, my team can't really go through bushes anymore. They can't scout because you're missing that big front line. So it's more like you should be willing to die when it gives your team an advantage. So if you see a big engage where you think, okay, I go in here, I die for sure, but my team's going to win the fight, that's where it's good to die. Or like, oh, we really need wave clear to be able to clear an objective, but my wave clear hero is about to die. Okay, I'll die instead. So it's just trying to identify when your life is worth like less than a hero you need more in the current situation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of that's a tough one, because in every single situation it's just going to be like different. Like sometimes it's not worth it to die, sometimes it's great to trade 1 for 1, sometimes it's terrible. It kind of like you gotta weigh it out in the moment. Yeah,
and that's the hard part about tanking, is there's no like clear this is the right thing to do, because it just comes down to every game is very, very different. You have to make all these little judgment calls, and that's where just years of experience comes in.
Okay, so we've covered tip number 3. Now jumping to tip number 4, identify your target. Could you give us a breakdown of that one?
Yeah, so identifying your target just is very important, because you need to know what your win condition is and what the enemy team's win condition is. So let's say you're playing some sort of hyper carry comp. Your hyper carry is going to be how you win. So you as a tank, your job is going to be either to set up a kill to get the fight rolling, or make sure to peel for your hyper carry. It's just like you want to identify what the biggest threat is that stops your team from winning the fight. Like, is it going to be the enemy tank who's pressuring your DPS? Maybe in that case that's the target you go for, or that's who you peel like from your team, or maybe killing the hero is more important. In that case you look more for the engage rather than the defensive play. And again, yeah, it comes down to just playing a lot of games and figuring out what the best thing in any situation is.
So when you're making this decision, are you looking kind of like at your allies, like who have you got in your team, or like who the enemies are, or kind of a combination? Or like, does it change at what point in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's changing all the time. It just kind of boils down to at what stage of the game you're in and what power levels your heroes are at. Because some heroes are going to be a lot stronger late game or early game, and you might want to shift your target prioritization depending on that. Because there's some heroes who at level 20, like let's say Vala at level 20, she's insane, and if you're not prioritizing her at that point, you probably lose. But early game, she's not going to be that good, so maybe you go for the more frontline threat.
Okay, I see what you mean. So it's kind of like it could be an evolving thing, like throughout the game.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. This one's definitely tough for Storm League people, especially me too. It can be tricky sometimes. When should you be soaking versus when should you be tanking?
The number one answer is you want to be soaking as little as possible, because it's more of your job to be keeping vision, staying out of vision, making sure that your team knows what's going on. It's just when you get to the points where, especially if your team is doing merc camps, you might have to soak a lane, or if someone dies, you want to be covering that soak because it might be too dangerous for someone else to rotate for it. But yeah, whenever you can, it's just soaking as a tank is just very inefficient since it's extremely slow for most of them to actually clear the lane. So you're wasting just a ton of time compared to like a Sylvanas running in, clearing the wave in 2 seconds and running away. You as a tank, like let's say I'm Diablo, it's going to take me 20 seconds to clear that wave, which is just comparatively really, really inefficient. So I'd say the short answer is just only when you absolutely have to, you want to soak.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so yeah, to wrap it all up, the top 5 tips that we reviewed here are: track your cooldowns, number 1, both your allies and your enemies. This will make a big difference for you. So number 2, keep vision for your team and also stay out of vision when it makes sense. So you want to be anchoring in those bushes, watching for who's coming by, sometimes let them by, as Cattle said. 3, be willing to die. Do some weighing it out in your head. Is it worth it for me to die here? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes no. Do that equation, weigh it out. 4, identify your target. Think about the team fight before you start the team fight. Who are you going to focus? Are you going to peel instead? What's your role in the team fight going to be? And then 5, soak if you have to. That's kind of the best way to think about it. And besides that, that was our top 5 tanking tips brought to you by Cattlepillar. Thanks again, HeroesHearth, for sponsoring this video. If you guys want to learn more, definitely check out twitch.tv/HeroesHearth. And yeah, keep an eye on this channel. We'll be doing more videos like this. Thanks for your time, and see you guys next time.